we really like to run an on-time show, and we're really, really glad to have you guys here today. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here celebrating our 72nd town hall. We try to have these town halls at least once a month, and we try to make sure that they rotate around our community as much as possible. I think also importantly to know is we try to focus on an issue at a time so that we can focus and do a deep dive on it. We also try to make sure that we bring experts in to have the conversation so that we don't sit here and speculate with one another, but rather we hopefully end up getting some answers as well to some of the things that are of interest to us. We are sitting in the 6th Congressional District. For those of you all who are at your first town hall, this 6th Congressional District, one of 17 in Pennsylvania, is all of Chester County, and then the lower portion of Berks County as well, which includes the city of Reading. The other thing that's cool to know about our community is that we are what I call a purple place. We are a really, really diverse community, very suburban, further east towards the city, very rural, westward, very urban, northward. And what makes us purple is an enormous diversity of political affiliation. We are roughly speaking 40% Democrats, 40% Republicans, and 20% independents, which is a really, really unique combination in this country. We usually see congressional districts that are of one ilk or another, and it's really important that we make sure that our office is representative of all of us, and that we make sure that we're making sure to listen to everybody in our conversations. So one of the things I would ask of you guys here in this room is that we respect and listen to one another. That we understand that all of us is here because we inevitably really love our communities, we really love our country, we really love our families. We are American people all the way through and through. And so if you, for whatever reason, do have a question or something that you'd like to ask, we have question cards, but we also just ask that you're respectful of one another and of each other. Let's see, today's town hall will be focusing on broadband equity access and deployment. And this is personal to me for lots of different reasons, and I'm certain for you all who have showed up today on a Friday in the morning for that, because broadband is a really essential component of all of our modern lives. It's a real requirement for economic growth, for education. We've seen it increasingly being used, especially during the pandemic, for healthcare, and it is also a really important essential element to public safety. So I'm happy to have two folks here today to talk us through some presentations and explain the BEAD program, which is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, from the federal perspective and as well from the state perspective. One of the things that's complicated about our jobs is that I come from here, but I come from Washington, D.C., where I literally just got out of the car from. And so my job is at the federal level. And then there's the translation of what happens at the state and the local level. So today, we are happy to have Nicole Ugarte, is that the correct pronunciation? Perfect. Here with us, and she's the Federal Program Office for Pennsylvania Internet for All, and she comes out of the NTIA, or the National Telecommunications and Information Administration Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth. Oh my God. Which is a lot. Boy, do you fit that on your business card? And so I'm going to welcome Nicole and have her come up here to do her presentation.
Sure. Thank you so much. Of course. I want to thank you all for having me here today. I see some familiar faces and some new ones. I hope to meet more of you at the conclusion of all of this. A little bit about myself before we get into this. I live in Philadelphia, so even though I have the big federal government kind of sign over my head, I live and work in Pennsylvania for Pennsylvanians. I hope that you'll see me not only as a liaison to Pam and the folks here in Pennsylvania working to make these programs happen, but also support for all of you. So anytime you have questions, concerns, you want to tell me about the good things that are happening around internet connectivity in your community, you will have my phone number, my email, and please call, text, carrier pigeon, whatever you need to do. We'll figure it out until you get the internet access. Before this role, I spent 10 years working in public safety communications, actually, starting off in radio, so making sure that folks were figuring out the right technology and the right way to communicate with each other. This came out of the 9/11 Commission report. From there, I moved on to the FirstNet Authority, which was looking at wireless connection for our public safety officers. So that's looking at how their phones can better support the work that they're doing. One thing that really struck me in so many of the disasters that I was supporting, both day-to-day operations and the hurricanes, the floods, the wildfires, was that folks in the community couldn't always call for help. We were making sure that our public safety folks had the opportunity, which is fantastic. There's still a lot of work to be done there. But how do we make sure that folks in their homes, at their workplace, have the connectivity to ask for help? And so much of what we're going to talk about today is looking at the internet to your home, internet to the workplace component of that, or what we like to call fiber to the home. Although I hope that you'll see that it comes with secondary benefits that we think will also impact wireless communications. How can we go to the next slide? Sorry, the next one. It's title slide. I don't know why they make us do these. All right, so we are talking about the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program, or BEAD program. And this comes out of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Quick show of hands, have folks heard me or somebody talk about BEAD or Internet for All? Oh, great, fantastic. Was not a prerequisite for coming in and such a meeting. So please, for those of you, if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, just like throw something at me or raise your hand, and we'll figure it out. And for those of you who've heard this before, my apologies. So this comes out of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, huge program. We're looking at the railways, the highways, clean, safe drinking water. We're also looking at the internet as a type of infrastructure, making sure that everybody has the connectivity to do their jobs, to do their schoolwork, but also do the things that they like, right? Netflix works also. Making sure that you are able to Zoom with your loved family members who might live in a different place, for example. Let's go to the next slide. So given the enormity of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, my agency, NTIA, which you can just think of us as a component in the Department of Commerce, we were given $48 billion, if you can imagine. And it is spread out over these 4 programs. BEAD, so the biggest chunk, Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment. We'll talk about that. Then our sister program, which is a series of grant programs specifically focused on digital equity and inclusion. So how are we making sure that everybody has the skills, the devices, and the knowledge to use technology to enhance the lives that they already live? 2 other programs for many of our states that include Native American lands. There is a specific call out for federally recognized tribal governments so that they can get access as well. And then over the last year, we've worked on a middle mile program. And this is seen as a little bit of a preamble to BEAD. This is working with companies and organizations to ensure that those big super highways, bundles of fiber, are going across large stretches of land so that it then can divide up to the smaller communities once it gets there. So we're in the process of awarding those grants. That was based on folks applying to us, and we determined based on need and how reliable and exciting the project was, whether or not they'll be awarded. There were a number of applicants from Pennsylvania, and I know that some folks are starting to hear about it now. It's very exciting. Next slide. Okay, so BEAD, what does this all mean? All it means is that we want everybody to have access to reliable and affordable high-speed internet. Now, if that was an easy solution, I think it would have been done already, right? But this $42 billion program is all about ensuring that we figure out where are the challenge spots and finding the creative solutions to figure it out. We don't have the answer, and this is why there's folks like me in my position in every state and every territory to talk to every Avondale every big city, every rural community, everywhere in between, to figure out what are the good things that are already happening and what are the challenges that you all see. What are the unique challenges that we need to solve, that we need to work around. So for this program, the idea is that we, MTIA, will give the money directly to Pam and her colleagues over at the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority, and then they'll divide up the funding based on programs that will plan and deploy high-speed internet. They'll look also at implementing digital equity programs. And then we also want to look at workforce development, job creation programs, making sure that people are able to find new jobs if they'd like, support them in their jobs, and that technology isn't the barrier, that whether it's your home connection, whether it's the internet at your office. There's kind of a crazy timeline. I can tell you where we are right now. We're talking a lot about BEAD because we want you all to know about it. We want you to be thinking about what's going on in your communities, what do you need, and what is going well. At the end of June, we anticipate making the announcement of how much of the pot of money each state will get based on the needs of those communities. And from there, Pam and her folks will need to devise an initial proposal. One thing that's different about BEAD, and something that we've learned from different grant programs that the federal government has done, is that we're asking Pennsylvania to tell us, what do you plan to do with the funding? And we check it before we even hand the money over, right? And so we want to make sure, is this sustainable? Is this something that's going to serve the communities in the long term? Does this meet the qualifications of the program? How are you meeting the objectives in the most efficient way? Are you creating jobs for folks in these communities that you're serving as well, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. I think something I'd love you all to take away, if you hear about the BEAD allocation at the end of June, what does that mean? That means the amount of the hundreds of millions or more dollars that Pennsylvania will receive. That calculation is based on taking the number of communities in Pennsylvania that don't have reliable, affordable, high-speed internet in comparison to all of the communities in the entire country, and then dividing it based on the highest need. The first pot is going to be around which communities do not experience, which locations do not experience 90/3, that's called unserved. The next bucket is going to be which are underserved. That's where we're really looking at 100/20. And then we are really focused on our community anchor institutions as well. Those are your schools, your hospitals, your libraries, where are the places in our communities that people are gathering. And we really see that places like that really need a gig of service. And so how can we support Pennsylvania in making sure our libraries have that kind of connection to bring people together? Next slide. Okay, I wanted to also highlight the Digital Equity Act just because it ties in so closely with what we're doing with BEAD. DE, or the DEA, as you may have heard of it, it is a specific call out focusing on building, at this point, a digital equity plan for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Next year, there will be another grant that will be coming from us to Pennsylvania about how to implement that plan. On top of it, there will be another competitive grant where folks can apply to us directly to say, you know what, the money that you're giving to Pennsylvania may not be enough, but I have a really creative idea. Let's, please fund us. Here's how we fit in with everything else that's happening in Pennsylvania. I think that it's important to see digital equity and BEAD as really tied together, though they're technically separate programs. It's only because the best way that I can remember it, and apologies to the few folks I know you've heard me speak before, I'm legally required to share that we consider BEAD without equity is just bad, right? So you really have to make sure that we're including the access, not only the physical access, making sure that people have the connections, but once the connection is there, once the fiber's to your home, that you have the device, that you have the skills to use the device, and that you have the knowledge of how this technology can enrich your life. So that's going to be a lot more of the soft skills, the at-the-elbow service, digital navigator programs. What happens when this app is no longer working, or the device did something differently? It's a lot of these programs building it up. So Pennsylvania is working on their digital equity plan right now. There's going to be a huge community engagement effort that you'll hear about more coming this summer. And then next year is when you can think about, okay, well, what are the programs that we really need in our community? We really need a digital navigator program. We really need to think about how we can ensure that equity is always considered when we're talking about technology. Because those are really challenging conversations to have sometimes. Next slide. Just wanted to highlight the big report, in the same way that BEAD focuses on the connection speed, digital equity really focuses on these 8 vulnerable communities. And so in the same way that we're going to ask Pennsylvania, how are you covering every community that is unserved or underserved, we're also going to ask, how are these communities especially being served by your digital equity plan, right? So looking across the board, folks who have been historically left outside of more traditional pathways to technology or access to learning about technology. Next slide. The big point that I want to leave with all of you is that these programs are huge, and this is really a historic point. We don't anticipate this kind of funding coming for this kind of program again. So here's our chance to really solve a difficult problem. And there's really a role for every type of person, every type of organization to play. Whether you're a provider, whether you're part of a community organization, or whether you're an individual who really cares about access in your community. I'd say, number 1, consider what are the challenges that you see. Number 2, what assets do you have? What's really working well? How can you partner with other organizations or groups or individuals in your area that either share the same challenge or your assets support their challenges? And then I'd say, tell Pam about it, tell me about it. We want to make sure that the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority and NTIA know about it, so you're on the radar, so that you can be involved in developing how this program rolls out in Pennsylvania. So again, I think the solution is going to come from all of you who see this every day and can help us support you through all of it. Next slide. I have a few business cards, but I just wanted to make sure I'm very serious about folks taking down my contact information. It's literally my job to support all of you, answer your questions. I will be the first to say sometimes the answer that NTI has is not the one that we like the most. I think Jim will giggle when he hears that. But I really encourage you all to at least give me a shot to answer your questions, make sure that you feel connected, and maybe connect you to other individuals who might be great partners as well. I think that we're going to have some time for questions later on. Yep. Great, thank you so much.
And that's a good segue into, you should have gotten something that looks a little like this, and please fill it out if you do have a question, and please hand it to one of my amazingly capable members of our team who, please raise your hand if you're part of the Hula team. There's a bunch of us here to hand them up, and we'll look at them when we're done with the presentation. Also, please make sure that you fill out the back and that it's legible so that we can contact you afterwards. We are very, very privileged to have yet another amazing bucket of knowledge, font of knowledge, Pam Frontino, and she is the grants manager at the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority. Your titles are longer than ours down in DC. And she's going to lead us in a presentation about the state's role in the BEAD program. So first federal and then state. Over to you, Pam.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here. It's always hard to follow Nicole and giving information and speaking, but I also get nervous for things like, not just because I'm meeting a congresswoman and speaking with her, but also because these are such important events, being able to communicate the information and understand your needs and your concerns and be able to answer your questions. So please bear with me, and I promise that if I can't answer a question, I will do my best to get back to you at a later time. But my name is Pam Frontino, and as mentioned, I'm the grants manager with the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority. We commonly refer to ourselves as the PBDA or just the authority, so I'll skip the long title going forward. You can go ahead to the next slide. I'll give you an overview. Sorry about this, is quite a bit of information on one slide, but we were established, the authority, in December 21st of 2021, so it's a fairly young agency, and we're an independent authority, but we are lucky to be housed within the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development under the governor. We were created to accomplish a few things, mostly to give you an overview. It's to administer federal funding that we are receiving, as Nicole mentioned, this incredible opportunity to connect Pennsylvania. And really working statewide, we want to understand every community, whether it's rural, suburban, urban. We are governed by an 11-member board of directors, and they are very important because any major decision, whether it's guidelines for our grant programs, which I've been very busy working on, or any kind of major development, major policy related issue does have to be considered and voted on by our board of directors. There are, as I mentioned, 11 members. We have 4 legislative members at the state level. Senator Kristen Phillips Hill, she's from the New York area. Senator John Kane, some of you might know him well. He's from this area out in Chester County. Representative Robert Matsey from Western Pennsylvania, and then Representative Carl Metzger, also Western Pennsylvania. The chairwoman of the Public Utilities Commission sits on our board, and the executive director of the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. I suppose I didn't give much background about myself, but I actually came from working with the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. It's a legislative agency within the General Assembly doing research on rural-related policy. That's where I was before coming to the authority. Something I thought about on my way here that I did not include on this slide, very importantly, we are also advised by 4 subcommittees, which some of you might be familiar with. They cover the technical aspects of broadband, so sort of the construction end, which, and I'll talk about in a little bit, is really pertinent to not only BEAD, but another program that we're very close to standing up. Next is a workforce and supply chain subcommittee. As Nicole mentioned, workforce and job development is so important for this initiative that we are tasked with. Not only supplying people in communities with positions that can be connected with this, but also how is this going to work? We have such a great, again, opportunity, but we need the people. We need physical people to actually make this happen. So that's a big part. And then supply chain. Of course, that is a major issue these days. So again, with the limited time that's connected with this, being really aware of how to make that work. We have some experts advising us on that. We also have a mapping and data committee. Nicole sort of talked about the funding component and how that is organized, decided. That's been really important, and again, I'll talk in a little bit about how we have determined which areas and how we're still determining which areas of the state are in the most need and what type of access is needed throughout the state. finally, then the last committee is focused on education and advocacy. As I mentioned, those are advisory committees. They really do feed information to our board of directors to help us establish what our goals and plans are. The members were strategically chosen by the board of directors. These meetings are, every group meets once a month, and they are public meetings, and they're all streamed virtually. So I do encourage you, if you are interested specifically in one of those topics over another, to tune in. You can, if you go to DCED's webpage, that's how you can access those meetings. I think I'm set for next slide. We are also advised by a statewide broadband plan. So Act 96, which is our enabling legislation, again passed in 2021, it called for several things. One of them is to establish this plan. Again, this was created by the authority, but really advised by not only expert stakeholders, but we also did a lot of outreach to communities around the Commonwealth to understand, again, the goals, the needs, what do we need around device and technology access. Digital equity is such a big part of what we're doing. Digital literacy, and then kind of technical support we need to be providing over the next several years. This is available on the DCED webpage. It's actually not even that long of a document, so if you're more interested in our specific goals and plan over the next several years, please take a look at this. All right, so in addition to BEAD, I will steer a little bit away from that just to tell you about the other large federal grant program that we're going to be administering. So it is important and it does relate to BEAD, so I'll come back to that, but it's ARPA funding. We have received $279 million. It's being allocated through U.S. Treasury, but when I say ARPA, I just want to clarify, because this has been a question from a lot of people. Unlike some other ARPA programs over the past couple of years, it's not an automatic allocation to counties. We are administering it through a competitive grant program. So I just want to make that, set that standard. As I mentioned, $279 million, and within that amount, there are going to be 3 different programs. The largest part of that is actually opening really soon. I'll talk about that in more detail in the next slide, but we have $200 million that'll go through BIP, or the Broadband Infrastructure Program. Next, $45 million will go toward multi-purpose community facility projects. That's exactly as it sounds. It's actually going to be funding to either construct or enhance or repair any kind of facility that is meant to increase digital literacy, digital capacity. So that's a pretty exciting one. That's going to be opening up a little bit later, either late spring or early summer. You'll see more information about that. So if you're part of any kind of community group and you are interested in funding that, again, with the purpose of making the facility up to date enough to really support technology, that's a good opportunity. The third is then $20 million for digital connectivity technology projects. That's to purchase computers, laptops, tablets, any kind of digital device. Again, the main audience for that is probably going to be any kind of community anchor institution that, again, the goal is to increase digital literacy, digital capacity. Thanks. So as I mentioned, this is the first and kind of largest of these CPF programs, the Broadband Infrastructure Program. It's $200 million. It's going to be administered as competitive grants again. There are 3 main entities that can apply. Local governments, so whether it be municipalities or regional, municipalities, county level, or kind of a cooperative of local governments can join together. Also private entities, so that could include your providers, internet service providers, and then community anchor institutions as well. Libraries, school districts, hospital systems are all eligible to apply. U.S. Treasury, they've of course given us a lot of helpful guidance on how we form this program. One of the things that they are really looking for is for collaboration between these partners. You know, not only the technical ability of the providers, but working with a community anchor institution or a local government, knowing that they have the expertise in what the community actually needs. There is a focus on fiber. U.S. Treasury really wants us to focus on applications that are going to lay fiber, so build out to homes maybe that lack that, or areas that it's just been too expensive in the past for these service providers to lay fiber. That's the main goal. However, understanding that there are some places that it's just not practical, whether it be because of cost or the geography, if it's in a really rural area, or topography. Pennsylvania, of course, is we have all the different landscapes here, so that is an exception. In those places, cable or fixed wireless are going to be the primary forms of technology for this grant. There is a public challenge period built into this application program because we want to avoid any kind of overbuild. If there's an area that a service provider is saying, wait, we're already providing internet to that area, we want the public to be able to say, well, you know, we don't want to build there. Again, it's taxpayer money. We don't want to use it if there's no need. So that there will be a public challenge period included in this application process. I mentioned very soon the guidelines will be posted, so if you are interested in this, if this is something that maybe you have been anticipating, I can finally say that very soon we are working with our board to just kind of finalize a few details. But per our legislation, that Act 96, we do have to post the guidelines for 30 days, which I think really benefits the public because you get a sense of what we're looking for. That'll be posted for 30 days, and then the applications will open. The reason I gave a lot of details about this, it's not BEAD, and I know Nicole and we're here to really talk about that program through NTIA, but this is really a precursor for BEAD. In fact, I would say if you are interested in BEAD funding, this is a great idea I would recommend also applying for this. It's not a guarantee for BEAD funding, but it does give a sense of, it gives the authority a sense of where communities are and what the needs are statewide, even though it is a separate program. So I do really want to emphasize that. We also, we do, between Treasury and NTIA, of course there are different guidelines and standards that we must follow, but we as the authority are doing our best to make sure we're as consistent as possible where we can be. So again, this will, even just looking at the guidelines and understanding what is put forward, is going to give you a good idea of what we're going to be looking at next year with BEAD. I'm not going to go over this too much because Nicole just did. Actually, if you don't mind going back up, I think, Nicole, I do want to stress again, we will find out mid-year, so after June 30th, how much funding is going to come into Pennsylvania through BEAD and DE. To find this number, what you might all be very familiar with the MAP challenge process that was through the FCC earlier this year. It was a really short window, but I think Pennsylvania did a pretty good job, and that was thanks to community groups and people who went online and submitted challenges, and we have a pretty clear picture of what the need is in Pennsylvania. So those maps that the FCC created are determining what Pennsylvania will receive in funding. We know it will be quite a bit, and we do recognize the major responsibility that we have to administer that. So we will have a number, again, mid-year. Thanks. So I just want to point out some partners, recognizing that this certainly is not a thorough list, a complete list. I'd say the most important partners that we have through this process and advisors really are communities, and again, talking to local governments and representatives of local groups. So again, some of them are here today, and we really could not do what we're doing without your support and giving us all the information that you have available. But I also wanted for your awareness to point out some major ones. On the state level, we work really closely with the Department of Human Services. You might be familiar with the Affordable Connectivity Program. Within our capital projects funds, the first program, that Broadband infrastructure program, there is going to be a requirement that service providers include ACP within any kind of project that they're working on. So we work really closely with DHS for anything related to affordability, which is a really key part of our goals and projects moving forward. Sorry if I'm blocking you. We of course work with Treasury and the Governor's office. The Governor has been really supportive and of course encouraging for what we're doing, which is helpful. We've contracted with a few partners as well. Penn State Extension has been really instrumental in helping us create our maps. That was something that we established end of last year, and it was really helpful for that FCC map challenge process, not only on the individual level, but then kind of the larger institutional level. Michael Baker International, that's a newer partnership that we were able to form. They are going to be, Nicole I think mentioned a little bit about the plan that we have to submit to NTIA later this year. We're working with them just for that capacity we are currently a 7-member team, and hopefully by the end of the spring, we'll be an 11-member team. But as you can imagine, to go statewide and hear from as many people as possible, we do need a little bit of support. So Michael Baker International, luckily they certainly have the expertise and again, capacity to go out and do that. And then federal level, of course, work with NTIA and our partners at Treasury. That's been vital as well. But I think that's what I have to share about the authority. As I mentioned, we will be up to 11 members of our staff. But same as Nicole, we do want to hear from you. So that's why I listed a few folks here who unfortunately they couldn't be here today. Brandon Carson is our executive director. Please do contact him if you have specific questions, overall questions about the authority and some of our projects. I'm our grants manager. Again, if you have specific questions about grants, and I mentioned a few that will be standing up over the next couple of years, please, happy to hear from you and answer questions. And then Kaylee Snyder is our outreach and engagement manager. Any kind of just broader general questions about maybe how can you have one of us come and speak at a community event, or just questions about timelines, that type of thing. Kaylee is, she's been actually with Pennsylvania Broadband longer than anyone in our office, so she's a wealth of knowledge and really great person to connect with. So I do, as Nicole mentioned as well, really encourage you to connect with us. We do want to hear from you. Again, that's really the most valuable source of information that we can receive in order to move forward with this and form your state plan. So happy to answer questions then. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pam and Nicole, for sharing your wealth of knowledge. One of the things that I was struck by while I was listening to your presentations was when we talk about the federal and then we talk about state and local and how all of these different parts of our government work with one another. I've only been in office now for a little bit over 4 years and never ran for anything before I ran for Congress, and never thought I would ever be in this sort of position, just sort of listening to the way that our government works in a really firsthand kind of way. The American Rescue Plan, ARPA, that you were referring to, is a huge piece of legislation, as mentioned, that was passed by Congress at the federal level in March of 2021. So this is how the wheels of our government work. It takes a while for all the organizations appropriately to get organized enough, and it's appropriate that we're thoughtful about these huge amounts of taxpayer money, that we're making sure that we're really using them wisely. it's frustrating for me as a new legislator to think that I can't point to the American Rescue Plan for like a year and a half, 2 years, when you finally start feeling it in your community. And that, I think, is unfortunate but true. That's how the process works. The Infrastructure and Jobs Act, similarly, was passed in November of 2021. And remember that the broadband conversation that we're having today is just a small, huge in terms of dollars, but small in terms of the overall scope of this, part of infrastructure investment. As you mentioned, generational. It's been about 40 years since we've invested this sort of money in places like roads, bridges, tunnels, and broadband, which didn't even exist the last time there was a major infrastructure package put forward. And so I just was hoping to give you a little bit of insight into how Congress works and how we move, how we pass these pieces of legislation, and then they get passed on to the state and local level for execution and for really wise execution on them, and I'm grateful for that. We are now moving into our question and answer period. Again, if you have any questions, please forward them to any of our circulating Shark Tank staff members. And I'll do my best to read the questions and also to help answer them. Okay, we got a few. Okay. The first one says, what does the broadband infrastructure build out entail? Cell towers, antennas. Will the broadband access be seamless to rural households? Who would like to possibly take this one?
I'm happy to get it started and then let me know. So for the BEAD program, the technologies that are preferred really are fiber. So think about coiled nerves almost that are either buried in the ground or actually largely throughout Pennsylvania, mostly hung similar to telephone lines just because of our rock plateaus and so many train tracks, which we don't want to dig under for safety reasons so often, right? And so in terms of the seamlessness to rural households, absolutely. I was talking with some folks in York County, actually. They were quoted by an unnamed provider, let's say, that's saying, oh, well, we serve most of your community, but to get down your block of 7 houses, that's going to be really expensive. So we need $60,000 from each of you just so we can go down your driveway. I'm sorry, I don't have that in my savings account. I don't know who's going to think, just to go down the driveway. It's what we call a long drop. That is unreasonable. This program, BEAD, really seeks to solve that, where the federal government will help pay for the infrastructure so that it goes to your house. And anybody who's anywhere in this country deserves the same speed as internet as everybody else. So we'll solve that problem, hopefully. We're working on it, right? So now, like Pam said, fiber directly to the home may not be the best technology based on where you live, based on how to get there, how much fiber is already in the area of your community. And in those instances, there's a couple of good opportunities. There's cable, okay, but that's sort of similar, a line that goes into your house. Another is what's called fixed wireless. So that's a fiber, and I'm sorry if I'm telling folks who already know this, but I had to learn it a couple years ago, and so I want to show off now. Thank you. Now it's a backhaul or a fiber line that goes directly to a tower. That tower has antennas and nodes on it that point in every direction, and they promulgate the service. That's a lot more similar to what we see, for example, for our cell phones. That's a really great service, except you don't always see it as that reliable. If there's a time of year where there's lots of leaves out, leaves get in the way. If there is a large grouping of livestock, they can interrupt the signal. We can't always determine accurately how far the signal is going to go, so if you're at an end of that, how are we ensuring that you're getting that reliable service? What the BEAD program wants to do is, let's work together to figure out the technology, but the end result is that you get internet, and that it's affordable, and that it's reliable. So if there's something that works better for your community, let's talk about it. There's certain technologies we've already determined we don't think work very well. We're not going to find the other ones, let's have a conversation. It's absolutely up for debate. It's a long answer to a short question. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Wonderful.
I don't think I have much to add other than, and not to stray away from BEAD and IIJA, but similar with the ARPA CPF program, we follow the same standards that BEAD does in terms of, again, the focus on the the fiber, fixed wireless and cable if the circumstances prevent wireless from being the technology of choice.
And that, my sole contribution is I just learned a heck of a lot more about broadband than I ever knew, just in this little conversation. And that's why you don't want people like me writing stuff like that in legislation, because we want people to really think hard about the fact that livestock can get in the way of their broadband is something that I never would have thought of, and thank God we didn't put into the legislation. So thank you for your input. I'm going to do my best to translate the handwriting. By the way, my handwriting is atrocious, so I have nothing to criticize about. Can this program be opted out, I assume from, is what they're asking. Do local communities bear funding responsibilities? This is the first question. The second one is multi-purpose community facility projects. I'm assuming it's asking, does it include libraries, library funding? And then the third one is BIP, can grants be awarded to cooperative municipalities, initiatives, or I guess at the smaller community level? I hope
that aren't county based. So if a number of townships, for example, want to get together and create their own little sub.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Discuss.
All right, I think I can remember all of these. So the first is about opting out. It is a grant program, so you if the community or the local government is not interested, there's certainly no obligation to apply. It's not required. So I hope that answers the first one. In terms of contribution from the applicant, there is going to be both for the BEAD program and then this year's CPF program, there is a match requirement. However, any kind of state or county or federal grant received can count as that contribution, that match contribution. Hopefully that will alleviate some of that, but there will be a match required in all of the programs that we put forth. The third was...
Can it be kind of combined? Can you organize yourselves and apply for something together? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, and we do really hope to see that, whether it be municipalities getting together, even counties. For this first program, the Broadband Infrastructure Program under CPF, and I'm sorry for all the acronyms, it gets confusing, I recognize. For that, yes, we want to see that happen. And even not only partnerships between local governments, but also partnerships between maybe a government and a service provider. Because again, we recognize that there's going to be different levels of expertise or different types of expertise coming from those different perspectives. So if there's an opportunity that county government can kind of flag a provider that you want to come in and do some of the work, that is, Treasury actually has asked us to really encourage that. So to whatever extent you can do that, that would be helpful. The last one, I'm sorry.
That was the last one.
Okay.
Can I add a little footnote? Especially for the BEAD program, remember it's not, the funding is optional, obviously you have to apply to it, but it doesn't have to be a local government. And so private companies can apply for this funding, whether they're going to do the broadband deployment, etc. If there are members of your community that are not interested in improving internet access, I would love to talk to you and some of those individuals, not to convince anybody, it's just in terms of dialogue. I would love to hear that perspective and better understand, because I know that we in our office are operating with a particular assumption, and we need to expand our minds and figuring out, what is it that American people want, and if there is a reason that affordable, reliable, high-speed internet is not something that would benefit folks or is seen as something that is undesirable, that is just such a valuable data point that I know we would love to pass up to the highest levels.
That's really interesting.
There was a question about libraries also. Is counting as one of in the multi-purpose community facility program. I just memorized that by the way after 6 months. Yes, libraries are considered a community anchor institution. Libraries, schools, facilities like this, a youth center, rec center. So yes, that is eligible.
Thank you for your answers.
Can I speak to Chester County though, since a lot of this is coming up? We have a Chester County Digital Alliance, that's the Chester County government, CCIU, Chester County Intermediate Unit, which I represent, Jessica Saul, by the way, and the Chester County Economic Development Council. We are leading a digital alliance for the county. We're reaching out to every municipality because we do believe this is incredibly important. So anyone in the community can connect with us because we're trying to connect with all of the community organizations because they have the connection to the vulnerable populations that need this the most. So we are trying to coordinate the entire county in this effort.
And maybe we could ask you to share your information.
Absolutely.
That would be great. The next question is, I think kind of related to the last few, which is, will the Pennsylvania legislature need to be involved in the rollout of these funds?
Yes, and they have been very involved. So passing Act 96, which again just sort of allowed us to exist, our office to exist, this authority. They were, of course, that's how that was born, I suppose. And then, as I mentioned, our board of directors, we have 4 members, 2 from each caucus on our board of directors. Well, excuse me, 1 from each caucus. So they are involved in that way, as well as other related policy matters come up, and they certainly do, because there's a lot connected with even just passing one program through our board. Other members of the legislature do get involved in that way. And as I've mentioned, separate from the legislature, that the governor's office, especially with the shift in administrations, he's been very interested in kind of understanding where we are, getting up to speed with what is happening. So we do have that involvement. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Next question is, how can we work with the FCC to ensure that our cellular digital connections are given as much focus as the MTIA is in addressing fiber deployment issues? And this person who's written this is from what would be an underserved community connection.
I'm certainly not from the FCC, but they've been great partners in all of this. I'd say that if you go to, I don't know the direct hyperlink, but if you put in your favorite search engine, assuming you have access to the internet, the FCC's national broadband map, you can look up any address, look at your address, and it'll show you all of the available providers, both for broadband, but also for cell service. And you can challenge a couple different things. You can submit a challenge for the service provided. So does a particular provider offer a service at a particular speed? Note that's different than whether or not you experience that speed. Then on the mobile availability challenge, the FCC has a map where you can check the speed on your mobile device. I'll say I'm not as familiar with this process because, as I mentioned, I'm solidly on the fiber broadband side, but my understanding is that you can submit the results of the challenge from the results of that speed test as part of your challenge on the FCC's map. And if you run into problems, email me, and if possible, we can jump on a phone call together, or if you have the accessibility, a video call together, and I'd be happy to talk you through the process.
Yeah, that's another thing that's been kind of interesting for me to learn about, is that this process has really been a crowdsourcing kind of an operation, which is trying to sort of suss out in all of our parts of our communities into the very nooks and crannies of where we all live and work, to make sure that we are reporting out and reporting back, where there's weak connectivity, where we are told there is something that there is not. And so I know that that's been a large part of this participatory process, to make sure that we're smart about when we spend all these huge dollars. The last question that I have is, long-term sustainability of the digital equity management. I think that this person is wondering what happens when all of this folds up and goes away. Practically speaking, even with BEAD programs, there still will be a need to address issues and opportunities for connectivity, devices, skills of literacy, and affordability. Thoughts or recommendations for Chester County and southeastern Pennsylvania being prepared for the ongoing digital management organization staffing and funding.
I'm happy to take us from the end. Yeah. I think there's a couple items there. I mean, this person is definitely, the same ideas are keeping me up at night, right? So much of what we talk about with BEAD is sustainability. What happens after 2027 when this money goes away? All of our investment is focused on these connections staying there. Somebody told me last week that I found to be so valuable is that we need to stop thinking of equity as a destination, and it's more of a process. And so when you're thinking about building your programs, how are you building your equity programs to be cyclical and continuing, and not seeking to achieve something, but build in knowing that these activities will need to continue. Not because there will always be people left out, but because we constantly need to check ourselves as our world changes and we learn more and we understand different things. I'd say secondly, if we're worried about things being left out or things being left behind, let's have conversations about what we can do to make sure that those at risk of being left out or left behind are included in the process now. This is why, Pam and I are banging on everybody's door to have these conversations now, way before we're even looking at signing any checks, because we want you all to be thinking about it. We want you to make sure that you have the time to think creatively about these programs and to talk to us about what might be good solutions, what might be an innovative way.
Aspects of sustainability, what can you do now? How can you leverage that momentum to help people in your community gain the skills and the knowledge to then, continue this after maybe the funding, after we're done with the construction, that part of it. But it is definitely complicated, and I think for us as the authority, what we can do is continue the conversations.
I kind of think about this as sort of like the work projects administration, kind of getting, electricity to that last mile. This is something that I don't think that we can all appreciate how much we need until we hopefully all have it, and then I think we can, once we have it, we can keep it. What time is it? Last question? Okay. So the last question is, does affordability include monthly fees to providers? I've heard talk about free internet for all. Is that in the works? Is there encouragement for more providers to come to Pennsylvania in order to create more competition? I can sort of take the first part of the question, which is the free internet for all. I think that there have been some proposals for that. This is not that in terms of what we're providing right now. I don't know where we're headed with that at a federal level. What I would say is probably at a federal level that is less than likely. But there are initiatives I know at different state and city levels that are interested in kind of broadcasting their internet signal across all the landscape for everybody to have. So perhaps I will turn that over to you guys for that. And the next question, as a reminder, is there encouragement for more providers to come to Pennsylvania in order to create more competition?
You want to take the first part?
Well, I'll mention the state currently does not, similar to what was mentioned before, the state kind of refers to the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program as the main source of affordable internet, and that will be really heavily written into the guidelines for our programs. I don't believe it's free internet, but it is a large subsidy coming for certain income levels. And my apologies that I can't give more info on this. Maybe Nicole knows a little more. It's just not a program I work with on a day-to-day basis, but that is certainly on our mind. We're, again, with the community dialogue that we're really promoting, these are issues that we want to hear more about. So,
yeah, the ACP, Affordable Connectivity Program, run through the FCC. Again, so sorry, not my agency, but they're great partners. Provides $30 a month off of either your mobile or your not only Pennsylvania, but most states and territories are looking to utilize ACP or a similar structure to support ensuring that low-income households can receive internet. Part of the DEEP program is also looking at ensuring that there are rate plans within the speeds that we've designated that are affordable to the middle class. So it's not just, because right now we'll see that, sure, you can get 120, but you have to pay $120 a month or something like that. And so, very easy for me to say, because I just pass it over to Pam and say, hey, Pennsylvania, figure it out. And what is that rate going to look like for Pennsylvania, across all of Pennsylvania? In terms of attracting providers to Pennsylvania, I'm not familiar with active initiatives. I know that we have a pretty robust provider environment. We have about 186 providers across different sizes, right? Mom and pop shops all the way to the big Comcast, Verizon, AT&Ts. So there's a ton of folks and a ton of folks who work together. But of course, we always want more business in Pennsylvania. So if you know of anybody, come on in. Water's fine.
The authority has welcome conversations already from several out-of-state providers that are interested in learning more about what we are doing so that they could hopefully come in Pennsylvania.
I think that's all that we have time for. Thank you for the very nice note that you all provided me here. It's not a question, it's just a nice note. And let's see, we have time for concluding remarks. Excellent. I can be sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Thank you all for coming out on Friday and listening to, I think, a pretty awesome but pretty wonky conversation about which is great. Hope that you understand how important this work is, how complex this work is, and how much we depend on you guys to make sure that this is executed and happens. Thank you very much for joining us and bringing your expertise and stunning personalities here today. With that, please do make sure, even if you didn't have a question, that you fill something out so that we can get your information, so we can continue to stay in touch with you. Thank you, officer, for taking care of us all and making sure that we are safe here. Any final comments or